My name is Mel Lehman. I'm the director of Common Humanity. And Common Humanity is a peacemaking organization which seeks to build understanding, respect, and friendship between people in the US and people overseas, especially the Middle East. And we have a particularly excellent guest for that topic, and an excellent guest because this gentleman, I just found out, has been a friend and a gentleman, just been to Iran for at least 30 times. So he's got a lot to tell us about for his visits to Iran. We're going to learn about the people there. What you're seeing behind me is our Common Humanities studio, and we show visually what we're trying to do. We have over on my right side some paintings from the Middle East, and directly behind me we have a quilt which is part of my Amish Mennonite American heritage, and it grows out of where our guest is seated right now. I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I'm from a little town called Leola, which is just about 6 miles as the proverbial crow flies south of where our guest, Mr. Ed Barton, is today. So enough for me, and let's get to meet our guest. Our guest today is Mr. Ed Barton. He served 6 years as director of the Center for Interfaith Engagement at Eastern Mennonite University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is where I went to school. Prior to that, he worked 5 years in Nepal and 18 years as the Central and Southern Asia Area Program Director for Mennonite Central Committee. He also worked 2 years as Quaker International Affairs Representative for Iran. It was during these years, as well as a year in seminary, that he developed an interest in Islam and in interfaith dialogue, as well as a special interest in Iran. I like all of this. I'm looking forward to this. Since 1991, he has made at least 30 visits to Iran. So let's meet our guest, Mr. Ed Martin. Welcome to our program.
Well, thank you, Mel. I'm very pleased to be here and speak to you and any of the guests that are on this or might also see it later. And I just want to give a kind of a rundown of how we got involved in Iran. This started back in the summer of 1990. Summer of 1990, there was a very bad earthquake in Iran, in the northwestern part of the country. And MCC, which I was, at that time I had been working as the area director at MCC for less than a year. But we decided we wanted to respond to that earthquake tragedy for 2 reasons. One was the scale of the tragedy. An estimated 35 to 40,000 people died in the earthquake destruction. But also the geopolitics of the time made us interested as well. You know, it was the Berlin Wall had just come down. The Soviet Union was collapsing. The Cold War was ending. And to some of us, it really seemed like communism was being replaced as an enemy by Islam, and Tehran was replacing Moscow as a source of evil in the world. And we wanted to demonstrate that we would respond to human need wherever it was, irrespective of political and religious differences. So we decided that we wanted to respond, didn't really know how to, because we didn't have any experience or any contacts. But the MCC representative in Ottawa, Canada, contacted the Iranian embassy there. Iran and the US do not have diplomatic relations, so there's not an embassy here. And they put him in touch with somebody who would be able to help us send some supplies to the Iranian Red Crescent Society. So we sent a shipment of medical supplies to the Iranian Red Crescent Society, the equivalent of the American Red Cross.
Let's see if we can get our screen share here and get some visuals. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think we could do well to see some pictures here.
Yeah.
The story of Mennonite Peacebuilding in Iran. And here we are at the Red Crescent Society. This was an office that you were in?
Yes, this is they have a number of offices. This is not the headquarters. This is one of the district offices. I think they have a large major office in Tehran, and then they have about, I think, 32 offices around the country, and this is one of those. Yes, so when we made our first visit to Iran in early 1991, we were co-hosted by the Iranian Red Crescent Society and the Foreign Ministry. And we ended up for the whole time that I was involved with working in Iran with MCC, we partnered with the Iranian Red Crescent Society, and we helped them both with disaster relief as well as with refugee relief. And here is at the another major earthquake happened in Iran was the BAM earthquake. People may have heard of that. And the Iranian Red Crescent Society set up a sort of a temporary office there, and also tents for people whose houses were destroyed could stay in temporarily. And MCC supported some of that work there as well.
I noticed that says psychological support. That's part of what you were doing?
Well, that's the Red Crescent Society was certainly doing that. When there's a major disaster and tragedy, there's a lot of psychological pain that goes along with it. And so I thought it was very interesting that they specifically worked at that as well as the physical side of things. And here, in that our first sort of support to Iran was in the earthquake affected area of that 1990 earthquake. MCC decided to fund the construction of 15 village health clinics, or as they are called in Iran, health houses. And this is one of those health houses that was built using MCC funds. And the American there is John Lapp, who at that time was the executive director of Mennonite Central Committee. And we were traveling with some staff from the Housing Foundation, the government agency that was responsible for constructing or for reconstruction in the earthquake affected area. I'm
sorry, here.
Oh, I think there's another one back before this. Another one before that, actually. Yes. The other thing that the Iranian Red Crescent Society does and that we supported was they take care of refugees. And there were, I would guess in the early 90s or mid 90s, there might have been more refugees in Iran than in any other country. There were several million refugees from Afghanistan and from the conflict there. And in early 1991, a war broke out. The US and Europe attacked Iraq, and a lot of Iraqi refugees came into Iran. There were more than 1 million Iraqi refugees. And this is an Iraqi Kurdish woman who was in one of the refugee camps that I visited and that MCC provided some support to. We also, interestingly enough, most of the support to the Red Crescent Society was in the form of financial assistance. But there was, at one point we assigned a couple. The man was a medical doctor and the woman was a social worker that had worked in Iran for a number of years as Presbyterian missionaries. The Presbyterian Church was the main American denomination that had work in Iran back probably up until the revolution in '79. And this couple was able to work in one of the refugee camps that was being run by the Iranian Red Crescent Society. And that was actually when we decided we would offer them to the Red Crescent Society, I really sort of thought, should I inform them that they had been there previously as Presbyterian missionaries? And I didn't know if that would cause any problems. But I also thought it would probably be a bigger problem if I didn't tell them and it was found out. So I informed the Iranian Red Crescent Society, and it wasn't an issue at all. And that this is not the couple, that other couple.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And worked in the refugee camp.
I'm having just a little trouble with my movement of my pictures here, so you'll have to forgive me. Is this a good picture to continue on?
No, we want to go back to the one after that Kurdish. Yeah, this one.
Okay.
Is an important person here on the right-hand side of the photo. Mr. Sadruddin Saad was the Director General for International Affairs of the Iranian Red Crescent Society when we first started working there. And he was a terrific person and had a really good, he had a vision of what it could show, collaboration between a Christian North American humanitarian agency and an Iranian Islamic humanitarian organization. He thought that would really show how the people from the different countries as well as from the different religious communities could work together to serve people in need. And he was just a wonderful person to travel around with and communicate with, both in his office as well as by email and fax. And this will make it, yeah, right there. This will make a transition. He came to the United States one time when his wife, who was a professor, had a fellowship at Georgetown University. And while he was here, he visited the Iranian mission at the United Nations and told them about the collaboration between Mennonites and the Iranian Red Crescent Society. And he encouraged me to go and meet the ambassador. And we were thinking, as I said, we didn't have many personnel at all in Iran with the assistance to the Red Crescent Society. And so we had the idea that maybe a student exchange program would enable Americans to be in Iran. During the Cold War, MCC used to send graduate students to study in Eastern European universities to have a presence there and learn to know the people. And so we decided to propose a student exchange program which allowed Americans to study in Iran and Iranians to study in either Canada or the US. And I really thought, I knew I wanted, let's go back. Yeah, let's stay on that other one for a minute. I want people to go and study Islam, study Farsi language, study Persian literature. I thought Iran would want to send engineers and scientists to study here. So I was really surprised when I learned they sent some of their best philosophy and theology students to study philosophy of religion. And that first couple, I think before this one, was one of the American couples that studied in Iran. They also sort of followed up on some of the work with the Red Crescent Society. This is the Daneshvar family, Dr. Daneshvar and his wife and one daughter and a young son. We offered the partner institute, the Imam Khomeini Education and Research Institute, that they could send their students to either the United States or Canada. They decided they wanted to send them to Canada because Iran has an embassy in Canada and doesn't in the United States. And they proposed McGill University in Montreal because some of their faculty had studied there. We proposed Waterloo University in Waterloo because there was a large Mennonite community that could host them. And we compromised on the Toronto School of Theology in Toronto. And so this family were in Canada for a number of years, and he did a PhD in philosophy of religion at the Toronto School of Theology. He's now back in Iran teaching in the Imam Khomeini Education and Research Institute. Interestingly enough, this daughter and a brother of hers who's not in this photo, both studied at a Mennonite school in Kitchener, Ontario, and then university in Canada, and are still in Canada. And then the man on the left, Mohammed Motahari, is the other student who studied in Toronto. And here he was hosting a student group made up of students from both Eastern Mennonite University and Canadian Mennonite University that spent 3 weeks on a cross-cultural experience in Iran. And he hosted the group at his home. The male students are out here with him. The female students are inside with his wife. And he and his family also were there in Toronto for a number of years. This is Dr. Syed Kazem Sajadpour, who I first met when he was working in the Iranian mission to the UN after I had been encouraged to meet some people there. And he's a great guy. And one of the things he told me he was interested in was peace studies programs that some American universities have. He said universities in Iran didn't have peace studies. And so in the summer of 1999, I had a sabbatical from MCC and attended a couple sessions of the Summer Peacebuilding Institute at Eastern Mennonite University. And the director of that, Pat Hostetter Martin, and I were able to get the State Department to give him permission to travel there. The Iranian diplomats at the UN ordinarily are restricted to a 25-mile radius of the UN because we don't have diplomatic relations, but we were able to get permission for him to visit. So he did, and soon after that, he went back to Iran, and we offered that if he'd like to send one of his staff to attend the Summer Peacebuilding Institute, MCC would support that. And so he did in the summer of 2000, and that began a number of Iranian students. Here we have coming to the Summer Peacebuilding Institute. This is a very interesting group. There were 9 women from Jamaat Azara, which is the women's seminary in Qom, Iran, who came, I guess about 7 or 8 years ago to the Summer Peacebuilding Institute. It was great having that group. They were brought by the man who is sitting on the left side, Dr. Mohammed Ali Shamali, who is a friend, who's an academic, and he was at that time, one of his roles at that time was international relations of the women's seminary. And so he and his wife brought these students, and it was just a great experience. While they were here, we brought them to MCC, and here they are at the MCC Material Resource Center, the quilting room, observing one of the quilts that's being made to be sold at a relief sale to support the work of Mennonite Central Committee, including its engagement with Iran.
And they're taking pictures that must be very interesting to them. And they like quilts just as I like quilts. So you see behind me that little picture of me, a quilt from this same area. So quilts are big, wonderful thing for me. And I share that with the nice students from Iran.
Yeah, they were very interested. When they finished, actually, Dr. Shamali and his wife had gone back to Iran after the first session of the Summer Peacebuilding Institute, and the other stayed for another session. And then my wife and I took them to Washington to fly out of Dulles Airport. And on the way, we stopped to visit an Iranian Islamic scholar and had a nice visit with him. And I think they enjoyed meeting him as well. We also have hosted various visiting scholars. Here we have two men who came, Dr. Mahdi Alizadeh and Dr. Eslami. They came and spent about 5 weeks in the US, spent some of that time at Eastern Mennonite, at the Center for Interfaith Engagement at Eastern Mennonite University, and visited other universities. They were interested in visiting universities because they head up a program in ethics study at an institute in Qom. And we had a great time. Here, this picture is actually back in Qom. It's not in the US, but it was after I had met them here and was on one of my visits there that they, and out of this student exchange program, one of the professors said, you know, it shouldn't only be the students that benefit. There ought to be something special for the faculty members as well. And this was one of the professors from the Toronto School of Theology, and he proposed having an interfaith dialogue conference involving faculty, scholars. And there have been 7 of those. They've alternated between Canada and Iran. And the 8th one was supposed to have been in June this year in Iran, but because of the COVID crisis, it wasn't possible to have it. So that's been postponed for another, probably at least a year. We don't quite know when it will be. This man is an interesting person, Mr. Ali Akbar Rezai. He was the very first person who came to attend the Summer Peacebuilding Institute at Eastern Mennonite University. He came in the summer of 2000. He came from the foreign ministry, and he has had various roles in the foreign ministry. He was in the embassy, and after being here for the Summer Peacebuilding Institute, he was in London in their embassy for some years. He was back in Iran and helped to host an interfaith or ecumenical delegation that went to Iran, and we'll hear a little bit more about that. And then he was ambassador in Cyprus, and now he is somehow involved with the Iranian nuclear agency. But a very fine person, and it was interesting, while he was at the Summer Peacebuilding Institute, his wife gave birth to their first child, and it was quite an emotional thing for him. And when he was visiting us here in Akron, in my home, I think it was his brother-in-law emailed a photo of his baby the first time he saw her. So that was quite something.
Yeah, wow.
But it was he that, I guess it was back in 2006, we were in contact, and he said, you know, the president is going to be traveling to the United States. And I thought he meant the previous president, Khatami, who I knew was coming, and he was going to speak at the National Cathedral in Washington and elsewhere. He said, no, President Ahmadinejad is coming. And could you arrange a meeting for him with American religious leaders? He said, when I was there and studied at EMU and traveled to MCC in Akron and to Washington, the Washington office in New York, I met a variety of Christians, and I would like the president to meet some people like that. And I said, oh, we could work at that. I had no idea if that would be possible. It's not the level that I was used to working at, or that MCC was used to working at. But with Doug Hofstetter in the MCC office at the UN, and I here, we were able to arrange that meeting in September of 2006 when the president was here for the UN General Assembly. And he came, and then he invited a smaller delegation. We had about 47 people at the meeting with him. He invited a smaller delegation to come to Iran, which a group of us, I think there were about 15 of us in February of 2007. And then again in September of 2007, we had a meeting with a larger group of American and Canadian religious leaders. And at that time, he presented this painting of the Last Supper, which was really nice. And it hangs somewhere in the MCC office now.
Wow, wow. That is really a remarkable photo. And wonderful picture of Jesus, and such a nice expression there on your face as you get that. Here is a whole new scene here.
Yeah, another activity that we've had more in the last I don't know, few years are learning tours to Iran.
Yeah.
And this man, Mortaza Rezazadeh, is the person who has organized and led the last couple learning tours we've had. And here he's holding his young son. And Mortaza is a great guy. I first met him here in the United States. He attended the Hartford Seminary in Hartford, Connecticut, and did a master's degree there. Unfortunately, he went back to Iran to do research for the for his master's thesis, and was not given a visa to return for defending the thesis and participating in the graduation.
Wow.
He did get his degree, but it was really sad. Now here on one of the learning tours, this was one where we took a group of students from Eastern Mennonite University and Canadian Mennonite University. And some of us are guests here in the home of Dr. Mohammed Shakir, a Quranic scholar, professor at Qom University in Qom, a really fine man who related to the American students who studied in Qom. I think some of them may have taken classes with him. And he also visited here once. He had a sabbatical at University of Virginia, and we spent some time together at that during that period. But he and on our this was kind of interesting. There's a little interesting story related to this. This was our bus driver on one of the learning tours going from the city of Yazd to the city of Shiraz, an all-day drive. And it was interesting. One time when President Ahmadinejad was in New York, and he was at a meeting that was mainly people asking him questions, and I was at that meeting, and somebody asked him about the role of women in Iran, and he said women in Iran are engaged in all aspects of the economy and the political system. He said women even drive taxis. He said, I don't think it's good for women to drive taxis, but they can and they do. And so the next time I was in Iran, I looked to see if I'd see any women taxi drivers. And sure enough, there is a company that I think all of the drivers are women. And I've seen those taxis. And I was really somewhat surprised and impressed that our bus driver on this part of our was a woman. Terrific driver. We got into the city of Shiraz at rush hour, and she had to make a U-turn on a busy street and did it extremely well. And I think in Iran, the president is right. Women are more engaged at all levels of society than in any other Muslim majority country that I've been in. Now these learning tours, we meet a lot of Islamic scholars, a lot of most of the people we meet are Muslim, but not all of them. Here, one of the learning tours is attended a meeting in a synagogue, and then had a chance to ask some questions and talk with one of the people there. So I should mention that in Iran, while the official religion of the country is Shia Islam, there are also Sunni Muslims, there are Jews, there are Christians, there are Zoroastrians, and the Iranian constitution provides for 3 Christian representatives in the parliament, 1 Jewish representative, and 1 Zoroastrian representative. And so here, this was when the student group was in Iran, and having lunch with the Armenian Orthodox Archbishop, who is the 3rd person on the left, and Archbishop Sarkisian. and who we've had, usually most of the learning tours have a meeting with him, and I've attended church in the Armenian Orthodox Cathedral in Tehran.
And we notice, I happen to notice there's one Coca-Cola on the table, and that happens to be sitting in front of you.
Yeah, how about that? Yeah, that's a little surprising to me. It seems Coca-Cola is available in Iran, despite the sanctions. I'm not quite sure how that works, but anyway. And here we see the tomb of Cyrus, a biblical figure. King Cyrus the Great was an important king in Iran, and our learning tour visited this place, which is his tomb. We also visited the city of Persepolis, which was built by his son and is not too far from where this is. It was destroyed by Alexander the Great, but there's still a lot to see there. If you get a chance to go to Iran, you should definitely go to Persepolis.
And we had this mentioned, we had previous programs on Iran with Nabi Sanbuli, and as I recall, this was pointed out as a sign of one of the very first times in human history of religious tolerance, that this is an important part of the Iranian culture and message for visitors and for the world.
Yeah, that's very true. And here we have the fire temple of the Zoroastrian religious community, which in Yazd, the city of Yazd, there are Zoroastrians there, and they were wonderful hosts for our learning tour. And one of our learning tours, a member of our group from the United States was the Zoroastrian leader of the United States. And so we got really special attention because of his presence with us. And
yeah,
that was really nice. Here we just see one of the students from Eastern Mennonite University is observing an Iranian father with his little boy, just sitting there.
This is such a great picture because we think of the headlines and the news articles, and we forget there's just people there. And here's a sweet little kid, and he seems to be happy to see you, intrigued by you, the visitor, with your camera, and his dad is on his phone. Just a really important moment, and we forget that. And that's so helpful, I think, to remember those things.
Well, and the people of Iran are wonderful, and their hospitality is very generous. And they you know, they're very kind. And one of the things that I find interesting is when, usually when I meet somebody who I haven't met before, and they'll ask me, what country are you from? And I'll say, well, where do you think? And usually they'll guess some Scandinavian country or the Netherlands or Germany, in part because there aren't very many Americans that they run into in Iran. And then when I say, no, I'm from the United States, it's always welcome. How do you like it here in Iran? And big smile and shake hands. And it's, I've never had any unpleasant experiences in Iran. Here we see the student group is being hosted in the home of a good friend in Tehran. Dr. Rasul Rasulipur and his wife, Mariam, have hosted several of our learning tours in their home. Dr. Rasulipur is a professor at one of the universities in Tehran. I've known him probably, I first met him, I know when I did. I first met him in 2007 because he was one of the hosts for our ecumenical delegation that was there at the invitation of President Ahmadinejad, and very great person.
Yeah.
And there was a philosophy professor at Notre Dame that he was very much interested in. And the first time I met him before our group was going, and so I was going to be coming back shortly thereafter, And he asked me if I could bring him the books that that professor had published or written. And so I did that. And then after our time there with the ecumenical group, I asked him would he be interested in trying to spend some time at Notre Dame with that professor, and that MCC would help with that. And sure enough, so he went in the summer of 2007, spent some time there with assistance from MCC. And then in 2008, Notre Dame brought him back. Mm. And the next year he was there for a whole year on sabbatical. And it turned out that his two children, son and daughter, attended Goshen College, the Mennonite school in northern Indiana, not too far from Notre Dame University. And both have graduated from there. And here we see Dr. Rasulpur and his wife, Mariam, and my wife, Kathy, and myself, very good friends of ours, really enjoy when we can have time together. Unfortunately, Kathy hasn't been to Iran yet.
Oh, so this is here in the States?
This is here in the States, yeah.
Okay, okay.
But I hope to get her there yet sometime. And this is, I think this is our final picture. And on the right there is Dr. Sajidpur again. Dr. Sajidpur is now the deputy foreign minister in Iran. And so he comes to the UN General Assembly every September when the UN General Assembly is, and when the president of Iran comes and the foreign minister. And Doug and I usually manage to have a time with him, have a meal together, and talk and catch up. And I just wanted to close with a statement that he made to us one time. He said, "I'm a believer in small efforts by ordinary people." And he said, the Mennonite engagement with Iran fits right into that.
That's a wonderful, wonderful idea. And let's see what we can do along those lines. I would, it'd be great to keep thinking about that.
Yeah.
Ed has been kind enough to offer his email. If you have a pencil there, this will be posted on our webpage. If you missed your pencil, if you don't grab that pencil, this will be back posted up. Ed would be glad to tell you more about Iran. If you want to know more about the work of Mennonite Central Committee, a very unique bridge to Iran, go to mcc.org and type in search for Iran, which I did myself, and very interesting, extensive work. If you would like to know more about the work of Common Humanity, there's commonhumanity.org. And we just established a peace channel on YouTube, Common Humanity Peace Channel. We are looking at the clock on the wall. We have a few minutes left. We're going to look for questions. If anybody there in the audience has a Q&A they would like to ask. And while you're typing that in, we have a tradition of asking all of our guests the same question. Very simple question, a very profound question. What can we do for peace? Sitting here looking at this, thinking of all the headlines we see and all of the famous people that have been on this topic, what is something that you and I and those of us watching this program can do for peace? What can we do?
Well, I would say if you're considering peace between the US and Iran, which is very important because I think Iran is maybe the country that the US might be most likely to start a war with. It's very important, I think, people write to their representatives in Congress and to their senators and really urge them to not engage in any kind of conflict with Iran, and also urge that they get the US back into the nuclear agreement that was negotiated under President Obama, and which President Trump pulled the US out of several years ago. there's tremendous agreement that limits what Iran can do in terms of developing their nuclear capacity, that they can't in any way develop any kind of weapon. But it's also supposed to provide Iran freedom from sanctions that various countries, especially the US, have put onto them. And so right now, their economy is suffering greatly because of the sanctions that have been reimposed on them. And during this COVID time, it's particularly bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have, that's an excellent thing we can do for peace. We had one question, really a comment from one of our viewers, Mats, who said a fascinating presentation, which is very much the way I feel as well. I think we've just about run out of time. Thank you, Ed Martin, so much for this great presentation. Is there anything we missed that you would like to add as a closing thought?
Well, I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to people about Iran. I would say that in both countries, people are limited on the kind of information that they get about the others. I do think one thing that's very interesting, there's a professor at University of Maryland who regularly does surveys in the Middle East. And Iran is the only country where the surveys show that the people have a favorable idea about the United States. And I find that really interesting, and I try to understand why that might be true. And I think I can think of a couple reasons that might be. One is that a lot of Iranians have friends or relatives who live in the United States. So they get more direct information, not just through the Iranian media or media on the internet or whatever. That's one thing. Another thing I think is that in many countries, the US, many Middle Eastern countries, the US is very supportive of the government. And some of those governments are not very nice, might be kind of dictatorial, and the people don't like the government. But in Iran, there's no question of the US being in support of that government. The US is very much not in support of it, so that doesn't color how people view America. That if they don't like their government, and some people don't, for sure, but our government is not being supportive of it.
Thank you, Ed Martin, so much for being with us. It's been great to have you here. We'll look forward to having you back at some point in the not too distant future to give us more insights about Iran. Thank you, Ed Martin.